The smell of charred burgers still hung in my backyard when my daughter Sarah decided to announce my irrelevance to our family guests. I was gathering empty paper plates from the patio table, minding my own business, when her voice cut through the hum of the gathering. Honestly, Mom just exists these days. Sarah laughed, swirling her glass of Chardonnay. She leaned against the railing, gesturing loosely in my direction. She's completely useless. Couldn't even help anyone get a real job if she tried. Greg, her husband of 3 years, grinned around a mouthful of potato salad. He didn't bother to correct her. Instead, he puffed out his chest and swallowed loudly. Doesn't matter anyway, he bragged, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. I've got a massive interview tomorrow, regional director level. Once I land this, we won't need to worry about anything. I stopped stacking the sticky plates for a fraction of a second. I didn't cry. I didn't drop this trash bag or storm off into the kitchen to hide my tears. At 62, I had long outgrown the need to defend my worth to people who refused to see it. I just smiled a tight, polite expression and continued tying the garbage bag. "That's wonderful, Greg," I murmured, keeping my tone perfectly flat. "I hope it goes exactly the way you deserve." He snorted, entirely missing the weight of my words. "Oh, it will, Paula. They're lucky to have me even walk through their doors." Sarah rolled her eyes, pointing a manicured finger at the mess on the picnic table. "Don't forget the ketchup bottles, Mom. And you can take our dog inside now he's getting annoying." I picked up the bottles, feeling the familiar exhaustion of dealing with my daughter's entitlement. They thought I spent my days knitting and living off my late husband's life insurance. They had no idea what my schedule looked like for the next morning. And tomorrow, Greg was going to find out exactly whose doors he was walking through. By the time the last guest pulled out of my driveway, the sun had fully dipped below the horizon, leaving the house in quiet shadows. Sarah and Greg had left their dog's toys scattered across the lawn and a stack of greasy pans in my sink. They always treated my home like a free hotel and me like the complimentary maid service. I stood at the kitchen island, wiping down the granite countertops in the quiet house. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. I walked over to the front door and opened the keypad panel. For the last 3 years, Sarah's thumbprint and a custom code had granted them 24/7 access to my house. They used it to drop off their laundry, raid my pantry, and leave their dog whenever they wanted a weekend away. With a few deliberate presses, I deleted her code. I wiped her fingerprint access from the system. The small green light flashed red, confirming the change. It was a small, silent action, but it felt like a heavy door closing on years of disrespect. Next, I opened my laptop on the dining table. I pulled up my family phone plan. Sarah and Greg's numbers sat right there, draining data on my dime every single month. I clicked remove line for both of them. I didn't send a warning text. I didn't draft a long emotional email explaining my feelings. I just cut the cord. If I was so useless, they surely didn't need a useless woman paying for their unlimited data and open-door pantry. I closed the laptop and poured myself a cup of herbal tea, watching the porch light flicker against the dark street. Tomorrow was going to be a very busy day. I needed to pick out a nice suit, because the company Greg was so eager to conquer didn't just have a hiring manager. It had a majority owner who preferred to stay out of the spotlight. My phone buzzed on the nightstand at 6:30 a.m. I ignored it. It buzzed again, vibrating aggressively against the wood. I finished clasping my pearl earrings, smoothed down the lapels of my tailored navy blazer, and finally picked up the device. It was Sarah. "Mom, the front door is broken." Her voice barked through the speaker the second I hit accept. "The keypad is flashing red. Open up, I need to drop Buster off." Greg is prepping for his big interview, and the dog is distracting him. "The door isn't broken, Sarah," I answered calmly, picking up my car keys. I changed the code. A long, heavy silence stretched across the line. You what? Why? Open the door. I don't have time for this. No. What do you mean, no? Her voice pitched higher, lacing with that familiar demanding edge. Greg has a life-changing interview today. You are going to watch the dog so he can focus. Just let me in. I have errands to run, Sarah. I'm leaving the house now. You and Greg will have to figure out your own arrangements for Buster. Errands. What errands? You don't do anything, she shouted, the disrespect flaring up instantly. I ended the call. I didn't turn off my phone, but I did mute her notifications. Stepping out into the crisp morning air, I locked the door behind me and walked to my car. For years, I had bent over backward to accommodate her, hoping she would eventually grow out of her selfishness. My late husband always told me to be patient with her, but patience had only bred entitlement. I slid into the driver's seat of my sensible sedan, leaving the drama on my front porch. I had a 9:00 a.m. meeting across town, and I absolutely hated being late to my own office. The glass doors of Franklin Supply and Logistics gleamed under the morning sun. Most people in our town assumed my late husband, Arthur, had sold the company before he passed. They didn't know I had retained 70% of the shares and full veto power over any executive-level decisions. I just let our CEO, David, run the day-to-day operations, while I managed the broad strokes from the comfort of my home. I walked past the front desk, offering a warm nod to the receptionist. "Good morning, Mrs. Franklin," she beamed. "Morning, Jenny. Is David in his office?" "Yes, ma'am. He's prepping for the regional director interviews." I pushed open the heavy oak door to the executive suite. David looked up from his messy desk, adjusting his glasses. "Paula, you usually just dial in for these? Decided to grace us with your presence today." I took a seat across from him, crossing my legs comfortably. "I have a special interest in one of the candidates today, David. Greg Miller." David frowned, flipping through a stack of thick folders until he pulled out a crisp white resume. "Miller. Right. On paper, he looks decent. Claims he led a major restructuring at his last firm. To be honest, I wasn't entirely sold on his phone screening. He came off a bit arrogant." "Arrogance is his specialty," I noted smoothly. "May I see that?" I took the paper from David's hands and scanned the carefully formatted bullet points. My eyes caught on several lines. Managed a team of 50. Oversaw a $2 million logistics budget. I knew for a fact Greg had been a low-level floor supervisor who was let go for chronic tardiness 6 months ago. Sarah had cried on my couch about it while I quietly paid their mortgage that month. "Are you sitting in on this one?" David asked, watching my face carefully. "Oh, absolutely." I handed the resume back to him, brushing a speck of dust off my sleeve. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." At 8:45 a.m., I took my place in the main conference room. It was a beautiful space, lined with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the bustling warehouse floor below. I sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, intentionally positioning myself slightly in the shadows of the morning glare. David sat at the head of the table, organizing his notes. My phone lit up on the table. Another text from Sarah. My phone says, "No service." "Did you forget to pay the bill again? Fix this right now." Greg is leaving for his interview and needs his GPS. I flipped the phone face down. They would have to rely on street signs today. Nervous David chuckled, noting my focused posture. "Not in the slightest," I replied, taking a sip of the water Jenny had brought in. Exactly at 9:00 a.m., the heavy glass door swung open. Greg walked in. He was wearing a sharp, expensive suit, likely bought with the credit card I had paid off for them last Christmas. His chin was held high, a confident, practiced smile plastered across his face. He strode directly toward David, extending a hand. "David, great to finally meet you in person. Greg Miller." he announced loudly, completely ignoring the fact that someone else was in the room. "Good to meet you, Greg. Have a seat." David gestured toward the chairs opposite him. Greg pulled out a chair, oozing an unearned sense of ownership over the space. He unbuttoned his jacket, leaning back with a relaxed, almost lazy posture. "I've got to say, I'm really impressed with the facility. I can already see a few areas where my leadership could tighten up your overhead." He finally turned his head to scan the rest of the room. His eyes swept past the whiteboard over the coffee station and finally landed on the far end of the table, where I was sitting, hands folded neatly in my lap. Greg's practiced smile froze. His eyes widened, darting from my face to David's, then back to mine. He blinked rapidly as if trying to clear a hallucination. "Paula." He whispered, his voice entirely stripped of its former boom. He gripped the edge of the table. "What are you doing here? Did you get a job here? As a secretary or something?" David's eyebrows shot up. He looked at me, bewildered. "Secretary, Greg? This is—" I raised a single finger, silencing David instantly. I leaned forward into the light, resting my forearms on the cool mahogany wood. "Hello, Greg." I offered a polite, professional nod. "I heard you had a big interview today. You mentioned it at my barbecue yesterday. Remember, he swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing above his tight collar. The confidence was draining out of him by the second. Yeah. But why are you in this room? This is a closed-door executive interview." "It certainly is," I agreed, opening his file in front of me. "And as the majority shareholder and acting board chair of Franklin Supply and Logistics, my signature is required on all executive-level hires. David handles the operations, but I handle the final approvals." The color completely vanished from Greg's face. He looked like he had just been struck by a truck. He stared at me, then at the name of the company on the frosted glass door, finally connecting the dots. "Franklin, you own this?" he stammered, gripping the arms of his chair. "My late husband and I built it from the ground up," I stated simply. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I just stated the facts. "Now let's talk about this resume of yours. You claim you managed a $2 million budget at your last position." I tapped my pen against the paper, holding his panicked gaze. "Care to explain how a junior floor supervisor managed that?" Greg shifted uncomfortably in his chair, pulling at his collar as if the room had suddenly gained 30 degrees. He looked at David, desperately searching for a lifeline, but David just leaned back, watching the exchange with professional detachment. "Well," Greg cleared his throat, his voice cracking slightly. "Titles can be subjective. You know, I was heavily involved in the logistical flow. I contributed ideas that impacted the budget." "Contributed ideas," I repeated softly, writing a small note on the pad in front of me. "I see. And the team of 50 you oversaw. Was that also subjective?" I helped coordinate shifts sometimes." He mumbled, staring down at his hands. The arrogant man who had proudly eaten my food and laughed at my expense 24 hours ago was completely gone. "Greg," I kept my voice, even lacking any trace of maternal warmth. "In this company, we value integrity above all else. We deal with heavy machinery, massive supply chains, and millions of dollars in client goods. If a regional director lies about his capacity on paper, he will lie about a warehouse hazard or a missing shipment. Do you understand why that is a liability?" He didn't answer. He just stared at the table, his face flushing a deep, embarrassed crimson. "Yesterday, my daughter called me useless." I continued, my tone conversational. "You agreed with her. You both assumed my life was small because I don't feel the need to brag about my accomplishments at a family barbecue." David shifted slightly clearly, realizing the deep personal history playing out in front of him. But he stayed perfectly silent. "You wanted a real job, Greg?" I pushed the resume back across the table toward him. But a real job requires real experience, not fabricated bullet points. I looked at David and gave a brief, subtle shake of my head. David closed his folder with a sharp, decisive snap. It sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Well, Greg, I think we've seen enough," David announced, smoothly standing up from his chair. "We have several other candidates to review today. We appreciate you coming in." Greg didn't stand immediately. He looked at me, a mixture of panic and sudden pleading in his eyes. "Paula, come on," he urged, dropping the professional facade completely. "You know I need this. Sarah and I have bills. You can't just tank my career because of a joke at a cookout." "I'm not tanking your career, Greg," I replied, calmly remaining seated. "Your resume did that. I am simply refusing to sign off on a liability. This is a business decision. My signature is required to hire you, and I am choosing not to provide it. But your family," he protested, his voice rising in desperation. "Family doesn't treat each other like free labor and an open bank account while disrespecting them in their own home," I pointed out gently. "You and Sarah made your boundaries very clear yesterday. I am simply enforcing mine today." I picked up my pen and wrote "declined" across the top of his evaluation sheet, signing my name clearly beneath it. I slid the paper over to David. "Please escort Mr. Miller out, David. I need to prepare for the European shipping meeting at 10. Greg stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. He opened his mouth to argue, but David stepped forward, gesturing firmly toward the door. Humiliated, angry, and completely powerless, Greg snatched his jacket and marched out of the glass room without looking back. I took a deep breath, enjoying the quiet hum of the air conditioner. It was only 9:15 a.m., and the day was already looking beautiful. When I finally pulled into my driveway later that afternoon, I wasn't surprised to see Sarah's car parked aggressively on my lawn. Before I even turned off the engine, she was marching across the grass, her face twisted in fury. I stepped out of the car, locking it with a crisp beep, and met her halfway up the driveway. "How could you do that?" she screamed, not caring if the neighbors heard. Greg came home completely humiliated. "You sabotaged his interview and you cut off our phones. What is wrong with you?" I stood my ground, clutching my leather tote bag. "I didn't sabotage anything, Sarah. I evaluated a candidate. He lied on his resume and he wasn't qualified." "He is your son-in-law," she yelled, waving her arms. "You own that huge company and you've just been sitting in this house, pretending to be some helpless old widow. You owe us that job. You owe us an apology. I owe you absolutely nothing." I stated, my voice dropping to a quiet, dangerous calm that finally made her stop shouting. "For years, I have paid your phone bills. I've paid your car insurance. I've let you use my house as a dumping ground and smiled while you insulted me to my face." I reached into my bag, pulled out an envelope, and handed it to her. She took it automatically. "What is this?" she snapped. "It's the transfer documents for your car insurance and a list of the utility bills you now need to cover yourselves. I've removed my credit cards from all your accounts." I looked her straight in the eye. "You told everyone I was useless, Sarah. I'm just giving you the opportunity to show me how useful you are without my money." She stared at the envelope, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. The realization of how much financial support she had just lost was slowly sinking in. "You're really doing this?" she whispered, the entitlement breaking into genuine panic. "I already did." I turned and walked up my porch steps. It has been 2 months since that afternoon in the driveway. The transition wasn't smooth. Sarah tried calling from Greg's new prepaid phone, oscillating between angry demands and tearful apologies. I didn't argue. I simply maintained my boundaries. If she wanted to visit, she had to ask. If she wanted money, the answer was no. Slowly, the calls changed. When they realized they could no longer force their way into my wallet or my home, a forced independence took root. Greg had to take a job at a local warehouse, a real job doing the actual floor work he claimed to have managed. Sarah had to pick up extra shifts at her clinic to cover the bills I used to handle. They don't come over for barbecues anymore, and frankly, my patio has never been cleaner. I still go into the office twice a week. David and I recently approved a new regional director, a brilliant young woman who actually earned her credentials. The company is thriving, and more importantly, my home is finally mine again. I sit on my porch now, sipping my herbal tea, watching the evening sun dip below the trees. I don't feel guilty. I don't feel like a bad mother. I feel like a woman who finally remembered her own value. If you've ever found yourself shrinking in your own home, quietly taking the insults from people who happily spend your money and eat your food, hear this. You do not have to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. You don't need to scream or fight or beg for respect. You just have to quietly close the door, change the locks, and let them face the real world. Your peace is your property. Don't let anyone live there rent-free. Have you ever had to cut off someone's access to protect your peace? How did you handle it? Drop your story in the comments below. Let's remind each other that setting boundaries isn't cruel. It's necessary. Stay strong and keep building your quiet empires.